basically the dynamic that's being worked under here. And I feel personally like whether some people want to see it or not, let alone admit it or not, this is something that many of us witnessed and experienced over the last 2 years in this society, right? There were people who reacted to this situation by standing with their individual principles in the face of the unknown, in the face of fear, in the face of everything that was happening. Principles like my body, my choice, for example, being a standard of freedom for everyone, right? I'm not going to force you to do something that you do not want to do with your own body because it's not my body and it's not my choice to make that choice for you, that kind of thing. Bodily autonomy being a very important thing, right? And then there were other people who, whether it was because of fear or latent authoritarian leanings or whatever, right? Whatever what they were being told on TV, it doesn't matter. Whatever the reason was, there were other people who suddenly felt sanctioned by being in a majority who would apparently excuse away almost anything against the minority that they were told were essentially the bad guys, the dangerous bad guys, if that majority was assured by the system that this was for the greater good.
A conclusion you could make from the Stanford Prison experiment is that when you tell people to be cruel, they'll do it. If you tell them it's for a greater good, like science, right. Who would have thought?
And people began to play roles in there with that. I remember when major streaming channels like Amazon Prime began to promote pandemic movies all of a sudden. 2011's Contagion made a huge comeback and became super popular. It was in the #1 trending all of a sudden. And it's almost like some people rewatched those movies because it wasn't a new movie. I mean, that was out for, 10 years or whatever. But they watched it because of what was going on, and then they began acting accordingly, as if they had cast themselves in that movie, but as a character in the film, but in real life.
Some men operate the big television cameras. Others control the pictures as they go out over the air. They see to it that Richard gets the right program at the right time.
So, despite the fact that that film is a fictional Hollywood creation that, I don't know, I watched half of it. I thought it was extremely propagandistic. I really couldn't get through it because it was just too ridiculous. And I didn't even watch the whole thing. But
he often watches television at home. The programs are fun, and sometimes he learns a great deal from them.
All right. Well, I'm not here for this, but this is Christmas, so Merry Christmas, I guess. I don't really think people understood what just happened the last 2 years. There's this society has really lost its fucking mind, folks. Okay, people got fired over a vaccine that didn't stop transmission. People were denied medical service because they didn't comply with the orders of whoever. I mean, it was unbelievable. It was a version of Nazism that happened right in front of our eyes, where the majority of brainwashed fools oppressed the minority, sanctioned by the government. And nobody's talking about it. It's over. Oh well. A whole bunch of people got fired for standing up for their rights. Oh well. Turns out the vaccines didn't even stop the stupid transmission. They're still forcing people to get that shit. So, I don't think this is a very celebratory Christmas. I think we're in the very beginning stages of a mass extinction of humans. And we are controlled by this psychopathic elite that does not value human life unless it's theirs. And we got problems. And you got problems if you're young. I'm already 70 years old. What the fuck do I care what happens anymore? I don't. They sent me my, you shit in, it's a colon cancer test. You shit in it. You give them a sample of you. Because I refuse to do the thing up your ass. I'm not doing it. I told my doctor, fuck you, I'm not doing that. I don't care if So he said, oh, you can do this test. So they sent it, I had my physical like last April, And this is fucking December. And finally, the place sent me the kit, see if I have colon cancer. So I'll send it back. But even if I have colon cancer, I'm not. Do you think I'm going to go through your shit? No, I'm not going to do it. I'll just fucking make sure I have the adequate pain relief, and I'll just check out. Because I'm not interested anymore in this fucking society. And this fucking TriMet board is our little personal example of how fucked up everything is, okay? This is our little laboratory that I've been using for years. My microcosm of the bigger world around us. A bunch of political cronies appointed by a corrupt governor justify everything this guy here, DeSude currently, trained by Kelsey, who was trained by McFarlane, who was trained by Fred Hansen, who was trained by Walsh. Their service is falling apart, and they don't even talk about it. They say everything's wonderful, and I'm the only one saying anything other than a few other people like Tristan Isaac on Bike Portland. Nobody cares that this is a crime syndicate, a literal crime syndicate. In the last episode, we heard about their transit-oriented development. It's all going well over there. No problems there. Everything's fine. We got more money than we need. We're getting more money every day. What the fuck is TriMet involved in that for? And that's when TriMet became a morally bankrupt organization, when they entered the property development field and transit became secondary. And so this is the next part and the final part, and we'll finish up this board meeting now. This is going to be the forward together the PSYOP. It's a PSYOP. Okay, this forward together thing was thought up by these technocrats led by this guy here, Sam DeSue. It was thought up a long time ago. Okay, and it's an actual example of what the New World Order is doing. It's a Build Back Better thing. So they destroyed the TriMet, and though I can't prove it, I'm pretty sure that this has been done intentionally. They had the perfect smokescreen with the so-called labor shortage, which is a pay shortage. They didn't even increase their class size until recently, so they intentionally ruined their bus service, and they caused suffering to thousands of people. But they're technocrats. They're not connected to the suffering they cause. And they get big paychecks and big pensions, so they don't think about the pain and suffering they cause. Just like this war in Ukraine, it could have been stopped before it started, but there was too much money to be made. And it's right in front of your face, this kind of psychotic leadership we have, who's openly hurting us, destroying us, while we sit here and watch.
So, General Manager DeSue?
Yes, our next, finally this morning, we're going to get a look at a revised forward together service concept. Here with us is Senior Planner Grant O'Connell and Jarret Walker with our consultant team from Jarret Walker and Associates. They've been working to sort through all of the feedback that was captured as part of the outreach.
Part of the PSYOP. Now, the PSYOP consisted, they have to do, this is how they PSYOP you. They've already decided what they're going to do, but they have this public comment, and then they pretend that, okay, we're going to make these adjustments. You see, we listened to you. See, you said this, and we'll listen to you. Nobody's going to bring up the fact that they were saying to the public that they were going to restore service. Starting 2 years ago, they said, we're going to restore the service. We're going to restore the service. Then they just said that they're going to change the service. Out of the blue, they're going to change the service. Nobody got any feedback there that was just like, we are changing the service. We're going to call it Forward Together. In Boston's case, it's Moving Together. It's exactly. Sometimes I think the MBTA and TriMet get on the phone with each other and coordinate their activities, because so many of of the things that happen on the MBTA are exactly identical to what's happening here. But these technocracies have already decided they're going to do this, and they didn't ask you. But they got public feedback after they made the decision they were going to do this, and that's part of your psyop into what they want to do. But nobody realizes what just happened because they don't even realize they've been psyop by the whole COVID thing. They don't even realize Trump was a psyop. They don't realize anything that's happening to them is actually coordinated and intentional. And it's amazing to watch as somebody who understands the dynamics of these things, to watch this playing out right in front of my eyes. And people lying in the streets, and they're worried about transit-oriented development and sending bombs to Ukraine. I mean, it's just obscene, man. It's pornographic. The kind of disconnect our leaders. They're not my leaders. They elected themselves leaders. You know, they are the leadership that's been selected by the oligarchs. When you go to vote, you're choosing between two people who have been selected by the oligarchs.
Process that we went through. And what you're going to see today is how that feedback has informed.
So you can't even do this without reading. I mean, he has to even read this. I mean, it's just amazing how he can't, his mind doesn't, he's not smart. He can't even tell you what he needs to be said with introduction to this without notes. And in many ways reconfigured the service concept. They psyoped you here, okay? They already decided they're going to do this, and then they got the public feedback, and now they've changed it, you see? They've changed it based on you. Yeah, sure, you dumbasses. Nobody complained about this. Just me. And I'm shadow banned, just like PDX scanner. Shadow banned. You know, you can't hear me. They took away my blue check. Okay. I never asked for it in the first place. I just wanted to do my dispatch call movies on there. And Musk is a psyop. I mean, that's just another psyop. Turn it over to both Grant and Jarret for a closer look. And just want to end by thanking both of you and your teams for what you've done. Yes, your teams are wonderful, Sam. I'll give Sam one credit that he deserves. Fantastic cheerleader. Fantastic. He really is the man for the job when it comes to cheerleading. He's got that great smile. I watched his movements during that whole fucking division opening. I mean, it takes a lot to be able to maintain that smile through that silliness. But he did it. He did it. He does it. Okay, that's why he gets the big bucks, man. TriMet in this community here, really commend your efforts. Yeah, of course you do. Oh, there's the Mussolini. Did you see him do it? He does the Mussolini look. He gets done speaking and he does his Mussolini. He goes back like, oh, look at me. I'm the dictator of TriMet and I'm saying something now.
I'll take a brief personal moment. It was a sort of a full circle moment this morning. That customer service team that you all
watch when Jarret presents the stuff. He knows the material. He's not going to use notes. It comes right out of his mind.
Recognized this morning. I started on that team 17 years ago part-time while I was working my way through college, and so it's incredible work. And as I have undertaken this project in partnership with Jarret Walker and Associates.
Jarret Walker could have been really excellent. Instead, he's a tool for the public transportation industrial complex. I tried to get this guy to fucking apply to be general manager of TriMet. Imagine if you had somebody like that in charge of a whole transit system. Can you even imagine what it would be like? But he's not a technocrat. He's not interested in being a technocrat because he knows what it is, I'm sure. He knows what that job is, and he doesn't want anything to do with it.
It's just been quite a full circle moment to think about where I started at TriMet and what were the big impact that we're looking at making.
Yeah, the big impact. You've hurt hundreds, if not thousands of people. Okay, that's what you've done. You've hurt thousands of people. I was listening. Lane Jensen was doing all the calls yesterday over at the scanner. And, Yeah, you have no idea the amount of suffering that's been going on by the people using this system. So these guys are patting themselves on the back. Look, I had a great job. It started like this, and now look at me. I'm a six-figure executive guy. Yeah, you're great for you. Not so great for average people.
On our service now today. So thank you for that personal moment. But it's my pleasure to bring back to you Jarret Walker and Associates, Jarret Walker himself, to speak more to how we got feedback on the draft service concept and how we've looked to respond to that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Grant. Thank you, board members. An honor to be here again. You mentioned Sue.
Turn on the microphone.
Today's agenda, we're going to review the Forward Together draft service concept again, just the highlights, share then the public engagement output we got, and then what we did in response. Next slide. So just a reminder, the guiding principles of Forward Together, which we didn't make up, they're based on what we heard, what you had heard from the community,
Yes,
are ridership and equity. Those.
Yes, you got psyop right into their little thing. Yeah. You got to hand it to them when it comes to manipulating minds. These governments, that's the only thing government is good at, is manipulating minds.
Those were the two pole stars that we were focused on. So why a new service concept? Because three things have changed since the last time you did this exercise in the mid-teens. There have been changes in demand, there have been changes in public values, goals, and expectations, and there have been changes in the resources available to operate service, which in the long run are good news changes. We'll have somewhat more resources in the future once we come out.
How do you know that? What do you mean you're going to have more resources? You have plenty of resources, but you won't get drivers. They're rolling in money over there. It's not a question of resources. It's a question of what do they want to do with those resources.
Of the staffing crisis. Next slide.
And Jarret Walker's, he's very bad for union employees. He's always railing against, well, the most expensive thing when it comes to transit is paying people. Okay, and I hate people that do that. You're a country that spends trillions on pork barrels that are unnecessary, whining about wages for workers, really fucking bugs me, man.
So what's in the service concept? Let me start with where they came from. Many of these ideas are from the TRIMET'S service enhancement plans that were done in the mid-teens. Then we did a whole lot of, we and our partners did a whole lot of analysis about existing conditions, demand, and so on. And then I also want to emphasize we had a session with municipal staff representatives. Most of the larger cities met with us in those workshops and several people from the counties. And they were involved in developing some earlier versions of the work that became Forward Together.
Forward Together. You mean forward for the serfs? We're going to do the serfs forward. It's not together. Their little cute little names are just repulsive to me.
The plan includes all this stuff I list on the left. I'll hit the key points shortly. Next slide. So, an expanded frequent network. As in almost every transit agency in North America, if you rank your lines according to bang for buck, ridership divided by the cost of running the line, the frequent lines end up on top. High frequency, the experience is the experience that whenever you need to go, the bus is coming soon. And that is fundamentally a different kind of product, a different kind of experience, a different kind of personal freedom than lower frequency lines offer. That's why for more than a decade you've had a frequent service brand. You see those little signs on the bus stops.
And TriMet never really had frequent service, except they did on a few of the routes during rush hour where they were running buses like every 5 minutes. They did have a few lines that were actual frequent, but it was only like an hour or two during the day or evening.
And so on. The plan dramatically expands the frequent service network. All of the yellow highlighted lines on this diagram are new frequent transit corridors under Forward Together, in addition to those that are already there. Next slide. Expanded and reduced coverage. The new coverage on this map, new lines that don't exist now, are in blue. But there are also some segments in pink, which are lines that exist now that would go away. Those are part of the trade-off. By and large, the coverage reductions are in places where there is neither a ridership argument nor an equity argument for the service. There are places where we know we will have low ridership, but we have a high equity need, and we have retained or in some cases added those services. But when you look at some of the obvious places, Cedar Mill, parts of, lower density parts of Southwest Portland, and Lake Oswego and so on, where we have neither a ridership argument nor an equity argument for the service, some of those services are removed under this plan. So there is a turning of the dial in the direction of equity, which is inevitably a turning of the dial away from some other people who are not in equity-sensitive areas. I want there to be no illusions about that and about the responses that you will receive from that fact. Next.
But people will get hurt, okay? When they get rid of those lines, people will be hurt. Okay, people that have come to rely on this service over all these years are now going to be abandoned. And they don't tell you that.
Improved weekend service. I can't emphasize this too strongly. Weekends are really the low-hanging fruit. Many American transit agencies are now at various stages of transitioning. Houston was one of the first, and I worked on that project back in 2015 that was implemented.
Yeah, and there's a lot of complaints about that, by the way. A lot of complaints about the Houston rework. Of course, you're not going to read about it because it's shadow banned. But believe me, a lot of people got hurt by that one too.
In 2015, to try to get weekend service levels up to be basically the same as weekday, minus the rush hour. And that's because such a large share of transit customers work at Walmart in one way or another, are working at jobs where they do not have weekends off, and are getting important things done on the weekends. And so, although there are certainly certain kinds of weekday-only school demand, like schools, there's a whole lot of your basic demand that sustains this network that's basically the same 7 days a week. So there's a big expansion in weekend service. 100,000 more people near service running on Sunday, 130,000 more.
Yeah, this is all pie in the sky. I mean, he's talking about something that's some kind of a dream. I mean, they don't have the staff. Okay, the place is a mess. I mean, for Christ's sakes, don't you think they should have restored the current service first before they started this? I mean, it would have made sense. But they had no intention of restoring the service. They lied to you for a year straight about that.
More people near frequent service on Sunday. Next slide. Let's get past this slide. Next slide.
What the hell is that?
The service concept, then, big picture, more frequent network lines, weekend service, more service to people experiencing lower incomes and low-wage jobs. That's the equity side.
That blew my ass.
Less Peak Express service and less coverage of low-demand areas with relatively few people experiencing lower income.
So we're back to the transit is for poor people meme. Transit is for poor people, and that's what they're telling you here. Transit is for the poor. It's not for the rich, the middle income. Transit is for poors. We're back to that again.
Incomes, that's part of the same deal. Next slide. Let me say one more thing about Peak Express. We'll come back to it. But the important thing about Peak Express to understand is that you have historically developed a lot of services that were very specialized around a commuter who works in a downtown office or on Markham Hill, who gets on the bus at 7 every morning to a job that always starts at the same time. There just aren't as many of those people anymore because so many of them are working at home. And so when there are so many other needs, we've had to turn down and in many cases turn off some of those services. All of those trips are still possible under the new network. We're not telling anyone to go away, but they aren't necessarily quite as express. And sometimes you have to change buses. But
yeah.
that is.
But you have to change bus. You now ruined your system, okay?
as an appropriate way to accommodate that basic fact. Please always remember, a bus that pulls out only for a couple of hours is more expensive per hour than a bus that you run all day, because you have to pay a driver for
There
a
you go.
short.
Here you go. You got to pay the driver. There's what I was just telling you. You've got to pay the driver. You can pay all these executives hundreds of thousands. You can send millions and hundreds of millions for pork barrels, but heaven forbid you should pay the driver.
Shift. You have to own a bus that you don't use very much. And also, usually, you run, if you're lucky, full in one direction, but then empty in the other direction because, of course, a driver's shift has to end where it began. So for all those reasons, always...
No, it doesn't. Not a TriMet. That's called road relief, and you get $1. Take 1 hour of your time, and you get $1. So he's wrong. He's wrong. You're wrong, Jarret. Why don't you know that? Why don't you know that, Mr. Brilliant Mind? Why'd you make that mistake by saying that?
Just remember that peak pullout, that pulling a bus out briefly, is a very expensive thing to do, and we try to, and so we're trying to do less of it, and we unpack more resources as we do that. Public engagement. So the draft service concept survey was open for about a month, most of October.
They gave you a month. They gave you 1 month. They're changing your service forever. They gave you 1 month. And we know they gave you the 1 month because that's the law.
2022, 4,500 valid responses. Some of this happened in open houses, over 500 people, and the rest came through in the online survey. Next slide. So, general question, do you think that the service changes outlined in the draft service concept over the next few years are the right way to improve TriMet'S bus routes? 51% disagree or strongly disagree. Sounds like bad news. Next slide.
Wait! Shut up. Stop, man. You're not going to go through this so fast.
Very much. And also, usually, you run, if you're lucky, full in one direction, but then empty in the other direction because, of course, a driver's shift has to end where it began. So for all those reasons, always just remember that peak pullout...
I'm glad you said it. A driver's shift has to begin where it ends. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. You're wrong. You're supposed to know this. I already talked this.
That pulling a bus out briefly is a very expensive thing to do, and we try to,
yes.
And so we're trying to do less of it, and we unpack more resources as we do that. Public engagement. So the draft service concept survey was open for about a month.
It's hard to go back on, scroll back in these because they're so fucking long.
Most of October 2022, 4,500 valid responses. Some of this happened in open houses, over 500 people, and the rest came through in the online survey. Next slide. So, general question, do you think that the service change...
All right. Okay, stop before you went through this. Okay, question 1. Do you think the service change outlined in the draft over the next few years are the right way to improve? Strongly disagree, 51%. So the majority says, fuck your forward together shit. Okay, that's what it says there. That's what it says. You can't cover it up. You've just showed us that most people say, fuck this.
Changes outlined in the draft service concept over the next few years are the right way to improve TriMet'S bus routes. 51% disagree or strongly disagree. Sounds like bad news. Next slide.
Okay, so let's see how he spins this. This should be good.
However,
however, let's this is going to be good. Let's hear. However, let's see how he does it.
Down into those responses, we find that they were overwhelmingly concerned about relatively specific issues in the plan.
Well, of course. So you're going to just forget about them, huh? Oh, the responses came from the people that were going to kill the most. So we don't have to worry about them because we're going to kill them anyway.
So we don't think it's appropriate to take that as a vote of the people on the plan.
Oh, of course not, Jarret. Of course not. We don't like your vote, so we don't think it's appropriate to take your vote. What a fucking hypocrite!
Entirety.
You took a vote. You had a month. These are the responses you got, you hack. Why did you do it if you weren't going to use the responses? What a fucking bullshit thing this is. It's just lost all of its credibility already.
38% of the responses were about just 4 services. 21% of the responses were just from 4 IP addresses at OHSU and Lewis and Clark. Now, that's not necessarily fraud. That's not necessarily the same person filling it out over and over. It may be a computer in a library, or in some cases, several.
See, this is exactly what I talk about. They find a million ways to spin what they don't want. They got the response they didn't want. Now they're going to spin it out so they don't have to listen to it.
Computers on a network that students can use. But we know the draft service concept.
So they didn't just take the surveys. They went to see. They actually checked the IP addresses. Great. Why don't you give more than a month? How about 6 months? You're going to make these changes forever. How about 6 months for people to respond? Fucking idiots. You see, they've already decided what they want. And they're going to do what they want. Doesn't matter what you say.
Service out of Lewis and Clark, and we know, and I know from my friends at Lewis and Clark, that there was quite an organized process that, hey, everyone go take this survey. We have recorded all those responses. We welcome everyone's feedback, but you should know that these responses were not evenly distributed across the city.
Well, why didn't you give more time, you shithead? You're fucking bullshit.
So with that in mind, next slide. High feedback lines are low ridership lines. So y-axis here is average weekly daily boardings, and the x-axis is the number of respondents who commented on the service. There's 39 Lewis and Clark in the far right-hand corner. Far more people commented on this route than have ever ridden it. And that is the...
That's not funny, okay? They're laughing. Okay, they want the service available for when they need it. Look, it's very funny to the... This is your picture-perfect example of how your technocracy works. They don't give a fuck about you. And they're going to do everything they can to take your voice and silence it. It's not funny. Why'd you bother having the survey then? Why'd you bother? Well...
sort of thing that we have to keep in mind when we talk about these services. 38 Boone's Ferry also in that category. Next slide. So what happens if we take those responses out, the responses that were just focused on one of those 4?
We're going to take out the responses we don't like. Just take them out. Get rid of them. Jesus.
Lines. Now we get 46% strongly agree or agree, 32.
That's not a majority. That's still a minority. And there's 20% in the middle that don't know. What's this? Wait a minute. 72 disagree. What?
Percent strongly disagree or disagree. So you know, we can feel
wow, Jarret's stumbling over his words. That's unusual for him.
A little better about that. Next slide. Draft service concept would reduce bus... Here we're sort of pressing on the equity issue a little more. The draft service concept would reduce bus service in some low ridership, higher income areas in order to expand service in underserved communities. Looking at the map, did we do this too much, not enough, or about the right amount? All responses, 54%, too much. Next slide. Take out those... break it out and focus on and take out those 4 groups and look at the responses that were distributed all across the city. That's the top bar. Now we get 42% saying about right or even not enough, and about 38% saying too much. The lower bar, by the way, is just those 4 groups of responses, the people who were obsessed with those 4 lines or came from those IP addresses, and they are, of course, overwhelmingly negative. Next slide. So, in response to that, here's what we did. We did some fiddling. We did some tweaks to address concerns on 3 of the routes that partly compensate for those losses. We made various smaller adjustments in response to comments, but what is important is what we did not do. We did not change the proposed frequent network lines. We did not change the proposal for expanded weekend service, and we did not change any of the coverage expansions to people experiencing lower income and low-wage jobs. nor did we change the reductions in peak express service or the coverage of low-demand areas. So, in short, we tweaked, but we didn't change things.
You didn't do anything, in other words. In other words, you ignored the public feedback and did what you wanted to do. Just say it, okay? Stop beating around the fucking bush, Jarret.
Substantially, we didn't feel we had a direction to shift the overall degree of focus on equity based on that feedback.
Equity.
Next slide. So, modifications to the draft concept. Next slide. So, Southwest Portland, Lewis and Clark, of course, was a huge issue. They were obviously distressed that the draft service concept had taken service away from them. Let me explain briefly why we are not picking on Lewis and Clark. I had friends at Lewis and Clark who said, "Why are you picking on us?" and said things like, "Well, you know, Reed is on a frequent bus route. Why aren't we?" Since that's, of course, the comparison. And I had to explain, well, Reed is on the way to other places. And because Reed is on the way to places, we can go past Reed and on to other places, and lots of different people find that.
This is unacceptable. This is unacceptable that they won't keep the 39. The people that use it want you to keep it, okay? You spend millions and millions on shit that nobody needs, better ed, division, all the shit you're doing, but you won't keep one little bus line. It's pathetic.
Bus route useful. Lewis and Clark is in a cul-de-sac. It's on the way to Dunthorpe. So it's every bus we send to Lewis and Clark is only for Lewis and Clark. No one else can use it. And that just means that it's a harder thing to do, and it's a harder service.
They've had that bus for 50 years.
It's just geography. So, however, having looked at that for a while, next slide, came up with this suggestion. If TriMet succeeds in getting line 35, Macadam, up to every 15 minutes, which is the goal, then half of that service would branch and go over the hill via Terwilliger and Taylor's Ferry. The other half would remain on Macadam through Dunthorpe. And they would come back together at Macadam in Nebraska so that you would still have the frequent service down Macadam in Portland. The effect of this is to put some basic service through South Burlingame. It hits the Lewis and Clark Law School and the roundabout located outside the Lewis and Clark Law School. That's about a quarter mile from the Lewis and Clark campus. That's as close as you'd get. But that's the proposed resolution. There are also some school trips covering some critical segments that we had removed. Next slide.
If I could, forgive me for interrupting, just go back one slide. I want to just also comment that it's important to note that Lewis and Clark College operates a fairly extensive network of shuttles on their own that they provide for free. So it's just an important part of the discussion. Thank you.
Right. So next slide. Okay, Markham Hill, this is a big thing. Huge job destination. Currently, there's a network of routes, numbered in the 60s, that come from various parts of the city and all go up there. But it's really rush hour service. It's to get people to the office jobs on the Hill. It keeps some students there, but it's not serving the nurse shifts. It's not serving the orderly shifts. It's not all over the clock for everyone, for all the kinds of jobs that are up there. Nor certainly for the medical visits that happen. For that, what Markham Hill has is frequent Line 8 from downtown Portland, and of course the aerial train. So and we looked very carefully at each of these express services. The ones coming from the north, there's one coming from Collins Circle, which can in the southwest part of downtown. There's one coming from the east side. We simply could not see a reason that we couldn't ask these people to just ride the other frequent buses and transfer to frequent Line 8.
Because it's a transfer, that's why. And once you add a transfer, you fuck it up.
It's coming from the same direction. It's a different issue coming from southwest Portland, from southwest of Markham Hill, because then you have to ride a bus sort of most of the way into downtown and then turn around and go back up the hill. So we continued to be concerned about how we get people up to the hill from the south side, replacing the various expresses that come from southwest Portland. But again, one of the key things we were trying to do was come up with a pattern we could run all the time, instead of something that's just there for the office commuters at rush hour. Next slide. So the proposal is still, and this did not change, that lines 43 and 56, which are two of the secondary radials in southwest Portland, would go to Markham Hill instead of going downtown. And the effect that this would have would be if you were on one of these two lines and you wanted to go downtown, you would need to change buses at a common stop at Hillsdale. Hillsdale has a whole bunch of service into downtown under the plan because the 54 Beaverton Hillsdale Highway goes to frequent service all by itself. So you have those buses coming through every 15 minutes. You have the Capitol Highway buses coming through every 20 minutes. There'll always be a bus coming soon in Hillsdale. So this is one of the more challenging things we faced, and I think there'll be more thinking about it, but this recommendation hasn't.
Look at this. TriMet cannot afford to provide a separate peak-only set of... Of course they can. Of course they can. Fucking liars.
Changed. Next slide. Northeast Portland service to downtown. So the plan takes out a segment along through Irvington along Northeast 24th, 27th, and 29th. This is an ancient segment. It goes back to the streetcar days. But it's slow, and it's going mostly through some of the lowest density parts of Northeast Portland. And we found that we were having trouble justifying it in light of its low ridership and the lack of real equity concerns applying to places like Irvington. Next slide. After considering this, we decided to continue to recommend that it be removed. However, we made an improvement along 33rd Avenue, which will make 33rd Avenue service a little more worth walking to. 33rd Avenue service is currently connected to line 70, which means it doesn't go downtown. We're proposing instead to connect it to line 17, which means it would go downtown. So that in return, if you're on, say, Northeast 27th or 29th, you have to walk over to 33rd, but we'll get you a bus to downtown from 33rd. You won't also have to transfer to get downtown. That's the proposed resolution. Next slide. There are a whole bunch of other changes in the revised concept. I won't talk through them all, but you have them listed in front of you, and I'm happy to answer questions about them.
Don't you think you should tell us?
Next slide. And there are even more. So by all means, ask questions about these. Next slide.
Why are you rushing through it?
Beyond all the details, what does this achieve? Please focus on these numbers. These are your headline numbers about what we're trying to achieve, what we're achieving here. The number of jobs reachable by a median resident in 45 minutes. So the average person out there, what are their opportunities for things they could get to in the way of a job or education that they could get to in a reasonable amount of time? Plus 45% in the draft concept, and we've managed to improve that even further to 49%. Roughly half as many more opportunities within a reasonable commuting time, on average. And this is better in equity areas than it is in other parts of the region. So you can see there is a further lean in the direction of equity. People in the TriMet district near frequent service, again, up 47%, almost half. Additional residents near some service, about 50,000, not a lot, because you already go to the places where there are lots of people, but we've gotten to a few more places, particularly where there are people experiencing lower incomes or where there are lower wage jobs. Streets, for example, like Columbia Boulevard, which is a great example of a street that hasn't had transit service, has a lot of low wage jobs on it, and that we're finally proposing to add service to. That's just one example of the kind of thing we're talking about there. In addition to new service into places, some of the north, for example, in East Portland, the plan has north-south service on pretty much every
I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I hope you do, but I can't. He's going through it so fast. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I don't know what he's doing.
South Street that it's possible to run a bus on. So a whole lot more improvement there. That's where some of these numbers come from. Over 100,000 more residents near weekend service for the first time. Next slide. So, back to Grant.
So after doing this extensive analysis and research work with Jarret Walker, this now becomes our guide for restoring service. As you saw through the ordinance today, we're down about 78% of pre-pandemic levels. So this concept now gives us sort of a guidebook for where we might grow back and restore over the next 3 to 6 years, gated by that operator shortage. So each year, we give us an opportunity to do additional public outreach around these ideas, additional analysis, and
yeah, they're going to never-ending studies. More studies, and then we'll do more studies, and then we'll do more more studies, and we'll get more bureaucrats, and we'll get more bureaucrats, and we won't actually do anything, but we're going to study it forever. What crime syndicate this place is.
Bring it before you before adoption. This next
So you see, they're gonna do this next September. Okay, this is garbage as far as I'm concerned. I don't like any of it. I'm very disappointed. Not surprised, because I know how they roll over there. They never cared about any of their riders. Never. From when I first started working there in 1996 to now. They always treated everybody like shit. They treated their riders like shit, and they treated their drivers like shit. And they're still doing it.
Fiscal year cycle of the annual service plan is right around the corner, kicking off in January, with public outreach going back again with pieces of this that we think are relevant to start implementing. And then first board reading in March, approval in April, and implementation as soon as fall of next year.
Yeah, right. We're going to implement it right away. We don't have any drivers, but we're going to...
Happy to answer any questions. That does conclude.
We don't know if we're going to have any people, but we're going to do this. Yeah. You don't have any idea what the hell you're doing. Okay? They don't know what they're doing. It's just absurd to watch this shit show.
You obviously see in your slides, we include a lot more of the details, so you have that at your disposal, but happy to answer any more questions.
Director Bauman?
Yeah, thank you. This is fascinating. Great work. I'm the one who always asks about Southeast Portland, so get ready. Well, if you don't mind, the context for this is there's a lot of concern for pedestrian and bicyclist safety around Cleveland High School. And so I wanted to understand, the original proposal was to, head north-south right past Cleveland, and that's been changed. And I guess you can talk about, is that not right?
Line 10 would continue to run north-south on 26th. There isn't a change to line 10 there. It runs north-south on 26th.
Okay. But there is a change.
There is a change,
70.
however, to line 70.
Okay.
So the previous version of the plan had line 70 on 26th also. Now remember, line 10's already there, though. That's not new.
Right.
Line 70 is doing that. Why is line 70 doing that? Line 70 is 12th Avenue and then coming down from the north, and it's trying to then be 17th Avenue in the south. And there's a big thing in the way, which is the frigging railroad crossing that causes so much delay on 11th, 12th. After struggling with that, and my office is near there, I deal with this all the time, the recommendation is that the route deviate eastward to miss that railway crossing. So it would go through Ladd's Addition. And the new proposal is that it go down 21st instead of 26th. And that means it will be 5 blocks west of Cleveland High School. And then it will turn west on Powell and then turn south. So although this is a somewhat longer trip through that area, it is a more reliable trip because we'll miss the grade crossing. So this route is 5 blocks west of Cleveland under the new concept. But there remains a north-south route on 26th. It's the number 10. I wrote it in this morning. It is packed with Cleveland High School students. It is very, very popular.
Right.
We have been engaging as a result of those incidences along Powell, directly through, Tom Mills could speak to it, but directly as a Cleveland High School parent himself, with the Parent-Teacher Association about what is the best solution. A few more subtle details is the original proposal had it deviate out of Selwood Moreland at Bybee and cross over the railroad there. But what that did do is make a little more challenging. So, part of the Cleveland district still goes all the way and includes Selwood and Moreland. Of course, I'm a Selwood resident, so I watch what's happening here closely too. But so the new proposal keeps it through Westmoreland, and so that's still part of the Cleveland district. So those kids still get a seat to Cleveland. But then by going on 21st, yes, it's a few blocks away, but there's actually some advantage there. By putting everything on 26th, you get these sort of burst of influx of kids getting off all at once, whereas if we drop them off on 21st, you kind of meter things out. And there's some value to that. Yes, it's debatable, but that's what we're having a conversation about.
But we're going to do it because we can.
by delivering them to the north side of the PAL. So you eliminate the requirement to have to cross PAL for 70 students. That's a huge improvement, but yet putting them on 21st so you kind of meter them out a bit and you walk over to Cleveland a little slower so you don't have this burst of students that might be spilling out into the street. So those are some of the more subtle nuances. I can definitely tell you between Tom and myself, we've looked at this very, very closely and are really pleased with this revision. It is out on our website, TRIMET.org/CHS, I believe, for comment right now, and we look to implement that even sooner than fall of next year, depending upon the comments we get, so that we can be responsive to the safety incidences.
Great, thank you. Director Kim?
Yeah, could we go back a couple slides, please? The initial draft concept had taken out the Brookwood Library route in Hillsborough, as we know, and we heard loud and clear from local residents and Hillsborough constituents that they need the route to remain. And it sounds like the route has not yet been inserted back into the concept in order for the Brookwood line to remain. Would you kindly tell us what's going on?
Yeah, good question. Excellent.
Yes. I think the framework of thinking outlined around like the 39 and 38 can similarly apply to the Brookwood Library. Yes, it's an important civic destination for Hillsborough, but it's also faced with the reality that it's in a office park next to an airport, and so it sees around 2 boarding rides per day from that location. And we're in early discussions, so I can't exactly state this for certain, but we are in early discussions with Washington County that one of the lines that we're introducing in along Cornelius Pass and Century, well, both of those lines would be fairly duplicative with the Hillsborough Link, the North Link service that they operate today. Sorry, not the North Link. I may not have the name correctly, but the service that operates into the North Hillsborough industrial area, we would be essentially duplicating them. And so we are in early conversations with Washington County about whether it makes sense to do.
Early conversations. I mean, what's the fucking, just your early conversations like it's some kind of complex deal here. Fuck, you fucking bureaucrats piss me off.
Duplicate each other, or whether we can shift that shuttle resources over to serve the Brookwood Library. They seem open to that conversation, but I can tell you for the interim, we aren't the removal of line 46, which would eliminate service to Brookwood Library. We're not doing that in the near term, and we want to see how this conversation with Washington County plays out before we actually take action on that. But I would also note that it's not necessarily inconsistent with what we said in the service enhancement plans. The service enhancement plans back in 2011 and 2015 formed a guide for how we might implement House Bill 2017 with the stiff shuttles. In the SEPs, it specifically did highlight Brookwood as an area that we think would be best served by that type of service. So we're not being inconsistent in what we've said in the past. But again, we're not looking to make that change in the very near term until we have further conversation with Washington County about the future of service in that area.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you keep me posted on that ongoing conversation with Washington County, please? And as I understand from talking to Hillsborough electeds and local residents, that Hillsborough folks are willing to keep 46, even if that means there will be less new service being introduced to the city. So it's that important to Hillsborough folks.
Good for you.
But
Stand up.
Regarding the timing and also that ongoing.
Well, you had to eat shit from Simmons last time. Stand up. You're the board member. You can't be told what to do. And don't let Simmons bully you again, like she did at that couple meetings ago, and you took it from her. You should have told her to fuck off.
Conversation. So I would appreciate it if you could keep me in the loop, please.
Absolutely, Director Kim, will do.
If you want that line, you can get it, okay? You demand it. Let's see a board member actually stand up for something for once.
Thank you.
Director Gonzalez.
Thank you, President Simmons. in line with the questions coming right now, I'm not going to ask about things happening in my district. I really have a question just about the general community process. There's a lot of changes that have been brought forward, and it looks as though they are quite interdependent. Are we coming out to the community and asking them to take it in whole, or to what extent are we actually entertaining what about this line, what about this route kind of conversations at this point?
So the practice to date and what we just did do, wrapping up, was looking at the concept in a whole. But now, over the next 3 to 6 years, it will shift to being conversations. Well, let's take a look at these bundles. And there are a lot of interdependencies. I want to be clear how and when we implement things, like we just talked about with Brookwood Library, we want to do in coordination with one another, so that when one service is introduced that may cover another, that we do so together. And so that will kind of dictate how we roll this out, and we want to do that carefully. But we will then put them together in bundles and take them to the public and say,
Yeah, sure you will.
now, we had the conversation about the vision as a whole, but now what do you think about this bundle for this year? That we think this is the right thing to do at this time, and that's how that conversation will go each year for the next 3 to 6 years. Does that answer?
Yes, that helps. And is it too soon to know what the first bundle is, or how you're prioritizing these bundles? The sequence will be fascinating to me with this.
It's going to be fascinating.
They're just gonna impose their will on people like they do. That's what they're gonna do.
To me too. We've
they're trying to pretend that the public's going to have some input here, but as we already been demonstrated, they don't.
We've started on what we think we're going to do with the next fiscal year. I don't know that we're ready to go into specifics, but what I can tell you is that we really want to lean into the goals of ridership and equity. And so
equity. People are living in tents, dying in the streets, and we're talking about equity because we're so disconnected. We don't see people dying, you stupid fuck.
So what we are looking at with our next fiscal year bundle was what the analysis that we've done indicates.
I spent my whole life in an office, and I think I know what I'm talking about to help people.
We should see a good return on ridership there. And so we just want to get people, want to make sure our services are available in a way that it attracts riders, that it brings riders back.
Yeah, you've done a great job. The last 10 years, you've ruined your system. And to where it is now in complete destruction. Completely unreliable mess.
Back to the system.
Yeah, and by the way, in case you haven't been paying attention, the MAX line shut down again because of the ice. Every time you get ice, it shuts down. They never figure it out. They never figure out how to stop doing that. It's just, oh well, we'll just shut it down again and again and again. And then they had to take buses off lines to serve the MAX, so all those riders that are waiting for buses got screwed. This place is a death cult right now.
And so that sort of guides how we will roll this out.
Thank you. In closing, I will plug the District 2 conversations and recognize I see some great thought here on how to resolve what have been long-standing issues in that region. Geographically, it's very hard to serve. There's the clear hotspot on Markham Hill. And a lot of gaps in serving it. I encourage us to be able to look at that one. It's been sitting in the back burner for a long time, and equity is always the reason why you get
equity. Yeah, we believe in equity. Get in the ditch. You pissed your pants. Get in the ditch. You're mentally ill. Get in the ditch. You don't like our drivers. Get in the ditch. Equity.
Of service issues in that region that will help folks that are not just the ones going to the office. So I really encourage us to look at District 2.
I heard at an open house, actually the Spanish open house, from a particular worker at OHSU who does janitorial work, and the ability to get to OHSU from the Southwest for her in particular was going to be life-changing. She was visibly emotional about that, and that's what allows me to continue to, even though we got all that feedback, to continue to advance that idea.
I'm glad they were there for that, because it's not just the residents and it's not just the institution. There's blue collar activity happening all over that area.
Blue collar.
Folks
I'm
have to
white
move
collar.
through
Ozzy's an elitist, but he knows what blue collar people want. He's an elitist. Ask Tristan Isaac.
I don't see any more questions, so thank you.
All right, it's the end of this.
Thank you both for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to conclude the briefings and hope.
Yeah, that was I want to show one more thing before we.
Social change is due on this continent. Social change is coming whether you like it or not. Social change is coming whether you are prepared for it or not. And technocracy is the means by which you can prepare yourself so that you can decide whether you want science or chaos. Thank you.
In the modern world, power is held by politicians and business people who work together to maintain the status quo, so that politicians retain power and plutocrats retain wealth. They do this in plain sight, but it doesn't have to be this way. There are a number of different power structures, many of which proven to work throughout history, although one of the most interesting alternatives is entirely theoretical. In a technocracy, power is still held by an elite, not an elite of plutocrats, not an elite of aristocrats, but an elite of technocrats, experts in science and technology. The government would be run by engineers and scientists who can apply the scientific method to solve real-world issues. Instead of electing career politicians, a small group of intellectuals would be chosen to lead us. They would focus on efficiency, what practically works, and the concept of morality may become obsolete. And it's that detail which has people worried. The claim that technocracy can replace morality. It makes technocracy sound more like Orwell's nightmare than a realistic system.
And that's what happened here. That's what you just watched, is a bunch of technocrats have replaced morality with their technocracy ideas. We're going to do this because it's better for them, and we're not going to consider how many people are getting hurt. This is exactly what I was talking about.
We can't know for sure because no such system has ever been established, but there have been attempts to establish a technocracy, and many still advocate for it today. The Great Depression was the most devastating economic depression in modern history, and it followed the biggest ever stock market crash. Once prosperous neighborhoods were thrown into poverty. In some cities, industrial activity came to an absolute halt. International trade fell by 50%. Millions of people lost their jobs and found themselves starving on the streets. It was in the 1930s
Kind of like now.
when conditions were at their most miserable and millions were at their most desperate that a strange group of people emerged. These people promised an end to the widespread suffering in North America. They were called Technocracy Incorporated, an incorporated social movement advocating for the establishment of a technocracy. Huge crowds were attracted to their public meetings, and there was a feeling revolution was nearing. The technocrats were radical to their core. They argued against the existence of their own country, instead advocating for the unification of all North and Central American states into one single technocratic nation, a utopian superstate to match the Soviet Union. From Colombia to the North Pole, national governments would be replaced by a massive technocrat bureaucracy. And if that doesn't sound ambitious enough already, remember Canada was part of the British Empire at the time, and it wasn't going to give up colonies without fighting. By 1933, there were groups of technocrats across the United States and Canada, some proposing ideas openly, while others planned violent revolution, just like how the Soviet Union was established. But the technocrat revolution never happened. In 1940, the movement was banned in Canada after they objected to...
All right, well, this goes into more. We don't have time for it. It's already gone. But what we have now is a world being run by a technocracy, okay? And TriMet is a technocracy, and they're making all the decisions, and you don't get any say. And this is a joke. This whole four together, I despise it. The correct way for TriMet to do this would have been to restore the service that they already had, and then slowly make the change. And that's not what they're going to do. They're going to just destroy the service and build it back. They're doing the New World Order thing right in front of your face, folks.